At a press conference in the Belarusian capital after the conclusion of the Eurasian Economic Forum, Russian President Vladimir Putin first spoke about the possibility of reducing his country's military spending. Putin, who admitted that Russia is spending too much on defense because it is trying to end the war with Ukraine, emphasized that in the next 3 years Russia will move toward reducing its military budget. Putin contrasted these intentions of the Russian Federation with the decision of the NATO member states summit to increase military spending to 5% of gross national product. Let me remind you that in the joint statement of the NATO member states following the summit in The Hague, the need for such an increase in the coming years is justified precisely by the strategic threat posed by the Russian Federation. And so, of course, Putin could not help but respond to this decision by the leaders of the North Atlantic Alliance member states. At the same time, we see that this is not at all the kind of reaction that could have been expected just a few months before this statement. Putin is not responding to the decision of NATO member states to increase military spending by promising that Russia itself will also increase its military expenditures to counter the threat from NATO, a threat that has been continuously discussed in Russia throughout almost the entire period of Putin's presidency of the Russian Federation. Instead, he is demonstrating his own peacefulness. And this is against the backdrop of the brutal and unjust war that his terrorist state continues to wage in Ukraine. We understand perfectly well why this is happening. Because the Russian economy is simply starting to buckle under the strain of military expenditures associated with the efforts of recent years. Let me remind you that the president of the Russian Federation did not plan for a years-long war with Ukraine. Putin was counting on a lightning-fast blitzkrieg, replacing the Ukrainian government in Kyiv with a puppet regime, then annexing the territories of eastern and southern Ukraine to the Russian Federation, and turning the rest of our country into a puppet state part of the so-called Union State of Russia and Belarus, to which this puppet state was to be joined by the criminal Vladimir Putin and Alexander Lukashenko. But things did not go as planned. The Russian Federation has already been waging its own aggressive war against Ukraine for more than 3 years. And as we can see, it is not very eager to end this war without achieving the goals that Putin set for his army back in February of what now seems like the distant year of 2022. And for that, money is needed. Money for military equipment. Money for new military factories. Money to create the largest mercenary army in Europe. Something Putin probably never even dreamed of when he started this war. And of course, the Russian budget, especially under Western sanctions, which could only increase if the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, initiated by American President Donald Trump, do not succeed, is already starting to buckle under these enormous pressures. And by the way, some representatives of the economic bloc of the Russian government, although cautiously, spoke quite uncompromisingly about this at the recent St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in the presence of Putin himself and other high-ranking Russian officials. Discussions about the fact that the Russian economy is in a rather risky state and may be approaching a recession continued both during the plenary sessions of this forum and during the session of the Eurasian Economic Forum in Minsk. Just a year ago, the ministers of the economic bloc of the Russian government did not even mention the possibility of such a recession and problems for the Russian economy, obviously because they were hoping for the war to end. And by the way, Putin himself might also have hoped that the war would end quickly, at least after Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. After all, the Russian leader could have counted on the new American president agreeing to all his terms and handing over control of Ukraine to Putin without any extra cost to the Russian president. However, things did not turn out as expected. And in fact, according to Putin himself, we are now entering a dangerous period for the Russian economy, which could lead to serious social problems in that country. And as is well known, social problems are always an issue for any authoritarian regime, which trades the rights of its citizens for a more or less stable life for an amorphous population incapable of understanding what is happening to their own country. And the population of the Russian Federation, moreover intoxicated by the virus of chauvinism, is precisely such a population. Well, a few conclusions can be drawn from this. First, the Russian economy is indeed approaching the point of overheating, and right now it is necessary to do everything possible with the help of our Western allies to worsen Russia's economic situation and to strive for social destabilization in the hostile state, to worsen the lives of every individual citizen of the Russian Federation, every Russian soldier, every Russian official. Second, on the eve of reducing military spending, Putin will of course try to achieve the maximum goals in his aggressive war against Ukraine. And thus, the next period of this war may become decisive for the Russian dictator. This is directly connected to the terror against the Ukrainian civilian population that is happening right before our eyes, literally at this very moment. This terror is meant to force the citizens of Ukraine to capitulate to Russia so that Putin can start reducing the military budget only when, as a result of this terror and Russia's strikes on its infrastructure, Ukraine will be in the Russian leader's pocket and living out its last years or perhaps even months as an independent state. This is Putin's dream. And as is well known, this remains one of the main political objectives for both the Russian president himself and the Russian people. But if Ukraine and its Western partners manage to get through this period without serious political and military losses, the economic collapse of the Russian Federation itself will begin. Misery, social problems and hardships will become a reality of daily life, and the price Russians will pay for their aggressive policies in recent years, decades and centuries. Thank you, friends. Stay tuned to this channel. Subscribe to it. Subscribe to my social media channels on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee and Donatello supporting these resources. Use the sponsorship feature on YouTube. Wishing you victory and peace. Good luck.